"You're coming with me, old man. Resisting arrest?" Officer Miller's voice, a whip crack in the chill morning air, sliced through the usual urban symphony of distant sirens and rumbling traffic. 93-year-old Arthur Jenkins, frail as a winter leaf, clutched a worn canvas satchel to his chest, his faded blue eyes wide with bewildered fear. He stood at the familiar, slightly grimy bus stop, a place of mundane routine, now a stage for sudden, inexplicable hostility. The young officer, badge gleaming aggressively, loomed over him. Before Arthur could form a coherent reply, a sharp crackle split the air, a bright, terrifying flash. Arthur's thin body convulsed, a choked gasp escaping his lips as he crumpled, boneless, to the unforgiving concrete. The world tilted, then darkened. For our heroes, past and present, seen and unseen, comment respect. Arthur Jenkins was a silhouette against the dawn of his life, a man whose edges had been softened by time, by loss, by the quiet accumulation of almost a century of memories. He lived in a small, tidy bungalow on a street where the trees were older than most of the residents. His wife, Martha, was gone 5 years now, and her absence was a quiet ache that never truly subsided. Faded photographs on the mantelpiece were his daily companions. Martha's smiling face, a much younger Arthur, lean and straight-backed in a soldier's uniform, his eyes filled with a youthful fire that had long since banked to embers. His current life was one of meticulous routine, a framework built to hold the loneliness at bay. Tuesdays were for the Veterans Center, a place of quiet camaraderie, lukewarm coffee, and shared, unspoken histories. The number 12 bus was his chariot, the stop at the corner of Elm and Main his regular departure point. He was known in the neighborhood as Mr. Jenkins, the quiet old man who always had a gentle nod for passers-by, who sometimes left small, anonymous bunches of flowers from his modest garden on neighbors' doorsteps. He rarely spoke of the war, not the big one, not the frozen one. Those chapters were locked away, deep inside, beneath layers of carefully constructed peace. The medals, the commendations, the nightmares, they were part of a life he had lived, a man he had been, so vastly different from the unassuming elder fumbling for his bus pass. His humility was not an act. It was the settled dust of a life that had seen too much, endured too much, to find importance in boasts or self-aggrandizement. He carried his past not as a burden, but as an invisible cloak, one that shielded him perhaps, but also rendered him almost unseen in a world that rushed and roared past. A world increasingly quick to judge the cover rather than read the profound, often heroic story within. His quietude was mistaken for emptiness, his slow gait for infirmity of purpose, his worn clothes for destitution of spirit. None who rushed past him on their busy ways could have guessed the iron will that still resided within that frail frame, or the monumental courage that lay dormant, like a sleeping giant, beneath the gentle exterior. The morning had begun like any other Tuesday. Arthur had his weak tea and a piece of dry toast, meticulously laid out his day's necessities, and checked the contents of his precious canvas satchel. Inside, nestled amongst his worn wallet, a small leather-bound notebook filled with Martha's favorite poems, and a half-empty tin of the peppermint sweets she had adored, was an oilskin pouch. This pouch, carefully preserved, held the tangible echoes of a past that defined him, a faded photograph of a radiant young woman who was his Martha, a purple heart medal gleaming softly even in the dim light, and a single battered dog tag bearing the inscription, Jenkins, APFC, U.S. Army. The air outside was crisp, carrying the scent of approaching winter, a scent that always stirred a faint, melancholic echo in his memory. He arrived at the bus stop on Elm and Main, his worn trench coat buttoned to his chin, at precisely 8:47 a.m., allowing his customary 5 minutes before the number 12 was scheduled to arrive. He wasn't alone. A young woman, her face illuminated by the glow of her smartphone, tapped away furiously, oblivious to the world, while a harried-looking businessman paced, muttering into his own phone, his briefcase, a weapon against the encroaching day. Officer Miller, badge number 312, was patrolling this sector, relatively new to the beat and eager to make his mark. He was a product of a system that sometimes valued assertiveness over empathy, action over understanding. He saw the world in rigid categories, and Arthur Jenkins, with his old-fashioned attire and hesitant movements, fit neatly into a slot Miller had pre-labeled potential problem. Miller's cruiser glided to a halt a little way down the street. He'd observed Arthur on previous patrols, cataloging him as a loiterer, perhaps even a vagrant. Today, fueled by a directive to maintain order and visibility, he decided it was time to intervene. He emerged from his vehicle, his movements imbued with the self-importance of his uniform, his footsteps echoing with undue authority as he approached the bus stop. "Morning," he stated, the word devoid of any genuine greeting, his gaze sweeping over Arthur with a look that bordered on accusation. "You waiting for someone specific, old-timer, or just taking in the local scenery?" Arthur, whose hearing wasn't what it once was, cupped a hand to his ear, his brow furrowing in polite confusion. "I beg your pardon, son?" he asked, his voice thin, carrying the tremor of age. "I'm just waiting for the bus, the number 12, to the VA center." Miller's lips twisted into a cynical smirk. "The bus, right. I'm going to need to see some identification. Standard procedure for individuals loitering." The word loitering was delivered with a pointed emphasis, designed to intimidate. The young woman glanced up from her phone, a flicker of unease in her eyes, while the businessman pointedly turned his back, eager to avoid any entanglement. Arthur, feeling a knot of anxiety tighten in his chest despite his confusion, began to pat his pockets. His hands, gnarled by arthritis and the passage of nearly a century, fumbled with the buttons of his coat. "My wallet," he murmured, more to himself than the impatient officer. It's in here. Just a moment, please." The slight delay, the natural hesitation of an elderly man under unexpected pressure, seemed to act as a spark to Miller's already short fuse. "Come on, Grandpa. I haven't got all day to stand around while you search your pockets," Miller snapped, his voice rising in irritation. "Or are you going to try and tell me you don't have any ID? Because that, old man, is going to be a much bigger problem for you." Arthur finally managed to retrieve his ancient, cracked leather wallet, his fingers trembling as he offered it to the officer. "Here you are, officer. Everything should be in order." Miller snatched the wallet with an air of disdain, flipping it open and barely glancing at the faded driver's license within. "Arthur Jenkins, huh? 93 years of age, and you reside in this vicinity?" His tone was imbued with an insolent skepticism, as if Arthur's very existence in the neighborhood was an affront. "Yes, I do," Arthur replied, his voice barely a whisper now, the earlier confusion giving way to a nascent fear. "This wasn't a normal interaction. I live just a few streets over. I take this bus every Tuesday to the Veterans Center for my appointments and the company." Miller handed the wallet back with a contemptuous flick of his wrist, his eyes narrowing as they fixed on the canvas satchel Arthur clutched to his chest. "The VA Center, you say? Very noble. And what exactly are you carrying in that bag, Mr. Jenkins?" he demanded, his hand dropping to rest pointedly on his utility belt. "Is it also for your appointments?" Arthur's grip on the satchel tightened instinctively. Inside lay not just objects but sacred relics of his life, pieces of his heart. "These are just personal belongings, officer," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Things that are important to me. A lifetime spent facing down far greater threats than an arrogant young policeman had taught him the value of quiet fortitude." But the cold dread spreading through his veins was undeniable. He had stared into the eyes of death on frozen battlefields, yet he felt a unique and unsettling fear under this officer's scornful, dismissive gaze. Miller took a step closer, deliberately invading Arthur's personal space, his shadow falling over the old man. "Personal things? Or perhaps things that don't quite belong to you? We've had a number of reports about petty thefts in this area recently. Sometimes," he said, his voice laced with insinuation, "folks of a certain age, they get a little confused. Or desperate." The implication was vile, a casual slur against Arthur's character that struck him more deeply than any physical threat could have. The young woman with the phone, her earlier unease now blossoming into visible alarm, had begun to discreetly record the interaction, her lens an unblinking eye on the unfolding injustice. The businessman, meanwhile, edged further away, his discomfort palpable, his eyes darting towards the end of the street as if willing the number 12 bus to materialize and offer him an escape. Arthur Jenkins, however, stood his ground. Not with physical defiance, his frail body was long past such capabilities, but with an unyielding inner dignity that seemed only to fuel Officer Miller's irritation. "I am not a thief, Officer Miller," Arthur stated, his voice regaining a fraction of its former timbre, a hint of steel beneath the tremor. I am a law-abiding citizen of this city, waiting for my scheduled public transportation. Miller let out a short, barking laugh that was devoid of humor. A citizen or a public nuisance? As far as I'm concerned, you're loitering. I am giving you a lawful order to move along. Now. Arthur's bewilderment returned. But this is my bus stop. The bus is due any minute. Where am I supposed to move to? I said, move along. Miller's voice escalated, cracking with the strain of his barely concealed aggression. He felt his authority being challenged by this obstinate old man. Or what, officer? Arthur asked. Not with defiance, but with genuine, sorrowful confusion. He wasn't loitering, he was waiting. The distinction was fundamental, yet this officer seemed incapable, or unwilling, to grasp it. His world had been turned upside down in a matter of minutes, his simple, peaceful routine shattered by this inexplicable hostility. Or I'll be forced to make you move, Miller snarled, his face flushing a dull, angry red beneath his cap. He reached out, his hand grasping for the strap of Arthur's satchel. Let's just have a little look inside and see what's so terribly personal that you're willing to defy a police officer over it. Arthur recoiled, a surge of protective instinct flaring within him. No, please, don't. The plea was soft, almost inaudible, yet filled with a desperate urgency. That satchel wasn't merely a container for objects, it was a reliquary, holding the most sacred fragments of his existence, tangible links to a past that had forged him, a past this belligerent, uniformed youth could not possibly fathom, let alone respect. The ensuing struggle was pathetically brief and one-sided. Miller, young, strong, and fueled by a sense of righteous authority, easily wrenched the satchel from Arthur's weakened, trembling grasp. The worn metal clasp, old and fragile like its owner, gave way with a sickening pop, and the contents of the bag spilled out onto the grimy, unforgiving pavement of the bus stop. A collective gasp, small but audible, rippled through the few onlookers who had gathered at a cautious distance, their faces etched with a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. There, scattered amidst the city dust and discarded cigarette butts, lay a small, tarnished silver picture frame. Inside it, a sepia-toned photograph of a breathtakingly beautiful young woman, Martha, his Martha, her smile radiating a warmth that even the passage of decades could not dim. Next to it, a small, velvet-lined jeweler's box had sprung open, revealing the somber, unmistakable form of a Purple Heart medal, its rich, violet-hued ribbon, a stark, poignant splash of color against the drab gray concrete, and glinting dully, almost shyly, in the pale morning light, lay a single, heavily worn dog tag, Jenkins, APFC, U.S. Army. Miller stared down at the scattered items, his aggressive posture momentarily faltering. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Was it confusion? A dawning, uncomfortable realization? Or perhaps, chillingly, just a new avenue for his derision? He chose, disastrously, the latter. Well, what have we here? He sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he nudged the Purple Heart with the toe of his polished black boot, a gesture of profound disrespect. Playing soldier are we, Grandpa? Or did you perhaps liberate these little trinkets from a real hero's collection? The insult, so casually delivered, so brutally cruel, struck Arthur with the force of a physical blow. His breath hitched in his chest. To have his service, his sacrifices, the memory of his beloved Martha, so callously, wantonly defiled by this ignorant boy. Those are mine, he whispered. His voice choked with a pain far deeper, far more searing, than any physical threat could ever inflict. He bent down, his body trembling uncontrollably, his old joints screaming in protest, to retrieve his precious, desecrated things. I earned that medal. I earned it with my blood. Miller, tragically misinterpreting Arthur's distress and his movement to reclaim his property as defiance, saw only resistance. His academy training, focused on immediate threat response rather than nuanced understanding, kicked into high gear. So, you're resisting now, are you? I gave you a lawful order to move along. You're obstructing an officer in the performance of his duties. His hand went to his belt, his fingers closing around the cold, hard plastic of his taser. Arthur, still stooped, his shaking hand outstretched towards Martha's photograph, didn't see the weapon until it was leveled directly at his chest, its twin electrodes aimed like malevolent eyes. "I warned you," Miller shouted, his voice escalating into a high-pitched yell, almost a shriek, the sound of an individual losing control, of authority curdling into tyranny. The sharp, distinct crackle of the taser discharging was sickeningly loud in the otherwise quiet morning. Arthur cried out, a thin, anguished sound, as 50,000 volts of electricity surged through his frail, 93-year-old body. He convulsed violently, then collapsed like a marionette whose strings had been abruptly severed, the side of his head striking the unyielding pavement with a dull, sickening thud. His hand, outstretched, landed inches from Martha's smiling image. The world, for Arthur Jenkins, dissolved into a painful, swirling blackness. It was 8:58 a.m. For a long, dreadful moment, an almost preternatural silence descended upon the bus stop, broken only by Officer Miller's ragged, heavy breathing and the rapidly receding footsteps of the businessman, who had finally seized his chance to flee the scene. The young woman with the phone let out a choked sob, her hand flying to her mouth in horror, but her camera, remarkably, remained steady, its lens a silent, unwavering, damning witness to the brutality that had just unfolded. Miller, looking down at Arthur's inert, crumpled form, felt a sudden, unwelcome prickle of profound unease skitter across his skin. The old man looked so fragile, so terribly still. He was resisting. Miller muttered, the words directed more to himself, to the suddenly judgmental silence, than to the horrified onlookers. He failed to comply with lawful orders, but the rote recitation of policy sounded hollow, unconvincing, even to his own ears. The power he had wielded so carelessly moments before now felt like a lead weight in his stomach. Then, a new sound began to intrude upon the morning air, slicing through the shocked stillness. It wasn't the familiar, almost comforting yelp of approaching police sirens, nor the urgent wail of an ambulance. This was different. A low, powerful, almost guttural hum, growing rapidly in volume and proximity. Within what felt like mere seconds, but was in reality no more than 6 minutes from the precise moment Arthur Jenkins' head had struck the pavement, the first imposing black Chevrolet Suburban, its tinted windows reflecting the pale sky like obsidian mirrors, turned the corner onto Elm Street with a swift, almost military precision. It was immediately followed by a second, and then a third, their powerful engines idling with a quiet, controlled menace that bespoke significant authority. They pulled up in a coordinated phalanx, effectively sealing off the street, their discreetly flashing emergency lights adding to the surreal, rapidly escalating drama. Doors opened with a solid, expensive thud, and several men in dark, impeccably tailored suits emerged. They moved with a synchronized alertness, a contained energy and coordinated grace that spoke volumes of specialized training and high-level security detail. One of them, older, with distinguished silver hair and eyes that seemed to miss absolutely nothing, took in the entire scene in a single sweeping glance. The young, now visibly nervous and sweating police officer, the small, stunned crowd of bystanders, and, most critically, the elderly man lying prostrate and vulnerable on the cold ground, the taser wires still pathetically attached to his thin coat. This man's gaze lingered for a pregnant moment on the spilled contents of Arthur's satchel before he spoke quietly into a lapel microphone, his words too low to be overheard. From the lead vehicle, another figure emerged, and his arrival seemed to instantly alter the very atmosphere of the street corner. This man was taller than the others, with a commanding presence that seemed to draw all focus, to suck the very air around him. He wore a suit that was clearly Savile Row, but it was his bearing, ramrod straight, an aura of ingrained, unquestionable authority radiating from him that truly set him apart. His face was stern, deeply etched with the lines of experience, command, and profound thought. This was General David Harmon, retired, a name whispered with profound respect and a touch of awe in the highest echelons of military and governmental circles, though entirely unknown to the rapidly unraveling Officer Miller or, indeed, to anyone else present at this humble, now infamous bus stop. General Harmon's eyes, currently as cold and hard as glacial ice, fixed with laser-like intensity on the fallen form of Arthur Jenkins. General Harmon strode forward, his polished Italian leather shoes making almost no sound on the cracked pavement, his movements economical, purposeful, and precise. His gaze swept over Officer Miller, a brief, utterly dismissive flicker, before settling with profound concern on Arthur Jenkins. He knelt, not with the hesitant creak of an aging man, but with the fluid, controlled motion of someone whose body was still very much an instrument of his will. His sharp eyes meticulously took in every detail: the thin, cruel wires of the taser still embedded in Arthur's worn coat, the angry red bruise already blossoming on Arthur's fragile temple, the raw, bleeding scrape on his weathered cheek where his face had met the concrete. Then, his attention was drawn to the scattered, pathetic items from the satchel. He reached out a carefully manicured hand, his fingers surprisingly gentle, and picked up the battered dog tag. He held it in his palm, his expression unreadable for a long moment as he read the stamped letters. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, his features hardened, coalescing into a mask of controlled, icy fury. "Private First Class Arthur Jenkins," he said, his voice quiet yet carrying an extraordinary weight, each syllable resonating with palpable authority in the suddenly, deathly silent street. "United States Army. Serial number 32,544,891. Officer Miller, now visibly sweating despite the cool morning air, his face ashen, took an involuntary step forward. A desperate attempt to regain some semblance of control over a situation that was rapidly, terrifyingly, spiraling far beyond his comprehension or experience. "Sir, I am Officer Miller, Elmwood Police Department, badge number 312, he stammered, his voice cracking. This individual, sir," he was non-compliant. He was loitering, refused to properly identify himself when requested, and then he became aggressive when I attempted to question him about the suspicious contents of his bag. "He resisted arrest, sir." I had no choice. General Harmon rose slowly, deliberately, turning to face Miller. He was not a physically imposing man in terms of sheer bulk, but his presence, his sheer aura of command, seemed to diminish Officer Miller, to shrink him, to render him insignificant. "He became aggressive?" Harmon repeated, his voice dangerously soft, each word a precisely aimed dart. "This man?" He gestured with a curt nod towards Arthur, who was beginning to stir, a low, pained moan escaping his lips. "This man, Officer Miller, who weighs perhaps 120 pounds soaking wet, and is old enough to be your great-grandfather by a considerable margin." Harmon's piercing gaze then fell upon the purple heart lying near Arthur's still outstretched hand. He bent again, this time with an air of profound reverence, and picked up the medal. He held it carefully in his palm, his gaze fixed on its solemn, poignant insignia. "Do you have any idea what this is, officer?" Miller swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing convulsively. It's some kind of military medal, sir. A decoration. It's a Purple Heart." Harmon corrected, his voice now like chips of granite. "It is awarded to members of the United States Armed Forces who are wounded or killed by enemy action. And this," he paused, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet each word carrying with the force of a hammer blow across the hushed pavement, "this Private First Class Arthur Jenkins is not just any soldier. Officer." He looked directly into Miller's eyes, and the young officer felt a visceral chill crawl up his spine, a primal fear he had never before experienced. "This vagrant, as you so readily and callously presumed him to be, this resisting individual, is a decorated hero of the Battle of the Chosin Reservoir. He saved my father's life, and the lives of several other men, during that frozen hell in Korea." A collective, audible intake of breath came from the stunned bystanders. The young woman with the phone lowered it slightly, her eyes wide with shock, dawning comprehension, and a profound sense of shame. "My father, Major Samuel Harmon, was grievously wounded, unable to walk, his unit cut off and surrounded." Harmon continued, his voice now thick with a deeply suppressed emotion, yet underscored by a steely resolve that brooked no argument, no dissent. "Arthur Jenkins, then a boy, a private first class barely 19 years of age, carried my father and 2 other severely wounded men on his back, through sub-zero temperatures, under relentless enemy mortar and machine gun fire, for 2 days and 2 nights until they finally reached the safety of friendly lines. He suffered severe frostbite to his own hands and feet, took shrapnel to his left leg, the very wound that earned him this Purple Heart, but he never faltered. He refused to leave them behind to die or be captured. General Harmon's voice, though still controlled, now resonated with a fierce, protective pride. The surviving men of his company, what few there were, they didn't just call him Jenkins, they called him the Saint of Chosen. Officer Miller's face, already pale, turned a sickly, mottled shade of gray. The arrogant bravado, the cocksure self-importance that had defined his every action just minutes before, had utterly evaporated, leaving behind a raw, terrified young man confronted with the crushing, inescapable enormity of his catastrophic misjudgment and his flagrant abuse of power. His mouth opened and closed spasmodically, like a beached fish gasping for air, but no coherent sound emerged. He looked as though the ground beneath his feet had turned to quicksand. The police chief, a portly, balding man named Henderson, who had arrived in a state of visible agitation in one of the unmarked city sedans that had discreetly followed Harmon's convoy, alerted by a swift, encrypted call from one of Harmon's ever-efficient aides who had, perhaps, recognized the name Jenkins from a high-level veterans support database or a similar restricted network, now pushed his way urgently through the onlookers. His expression was a mask of sheer horror and utter disbelief as he absorbed the full weight of General Harmon's words. He had seen the initial grainy viral clip from the bystander's phone just minutes before arriving, a blurry, damning snippet showing one of his officers tasing a clearly elderly and unthreatening man. He knew instinctively this was bad, very bad. He hadn't, until this precise moment, grasped how catastrophically bad. General Harmon, meanwhile, had knelt once more beside Arthur, his stern demeanor softening with genuine affection and concern as he gently touched the old soldier's trembling shoulder. "Arthur? Arthur, can you hear me? It's David. David Harmon, Sam Harmon's boy. Do you remember me?" Arthur's eyelids fluttered open. He groaned, his eyes struggling to focus through a haze of pain and confusion. He blinked several times, recognition slowly, painfully dawning in their faded depths. "David?" he murmured, his voice a dry, papery rasp. "Little Davy Harmon, can that really be you?" A fragile, almost heartbreaking smile, full of vulnerability and disbelief, touched his cracked lips. "Your father, dear Sam, he always talked so much about you. So proud." General Harmon's own eyes glistened with unshed tears, an emotion he rarely allowed himself to display, but his voice remained firm, resonant with controlled fury. As he turned his piercing gaze back to the now catatonic Officer Miller, his words were delivered with the clipped precision of a drill sergeant addressing a particularly inept recruit. "You didn't just assault an elderly citizen of this city, Officer Miller. You assaulted a recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross. You assaulted a man whose quiet courage and selfless sacrifice are legendary among those who truly understand what the words duty and honor mean. You tasered him, you brutalized him. For waiting for a goddamned bus." He let the words hang in the air, each one heavy, condemnatory, and irrefutable. Chief Henderson, his face grim, his jaw tight with a mixture of professional embarrassment and personal outrage, stepped decisively forward. He knew that immediate decisive action was paramount, not just for damage control, but because a profound sense of shame and anger towards his officer's conduct was churning within him. "Officer Miller," Henderson declared, his voice tight with barely suppressed fury, "you are hereby suspended from duty, effective immediately, pending a full and thorough internal and external investigation. Surrender your badge and your service weapon. Now." Miller, fumbling with clumsy, nerveless fingers, unclipped his gleaming badge, his hands shaking so violently he could barely manage the simple clasp. He then unholstered his Glock, his eyes darting around wildly, desperately, as if seeking an escape hatch from the nightmare his own actions had created. The sharp, metallic click as he placed his symbols of authority into the chief's outstretched hand sounded like a final, damning judgment. The bystanders, who had initially been a mixture of scared, morbidly curious, and passively observant, were now utterly silent, their expressions reflecting a complex tapestry of emotions. Shame for their city, pity for Arthur, and a dawning, profound respect for the quiet, unassuming hero who had lived among them, entirely unseen and unappreciated. Some of those who had been filming, initially perhaps with a sense of detached, digital righteousness, or for the fleeting allure of social media clout, now looked deeply uncomfortable. The stark reality of their earlier passive observation crashing down upon them with undeniable force. One or two quietly, shamefacedly, stopped their recordings. One of General Harmon's aides, a composed woman with a kind face and an air of quiet, unflappable efficiency, had already produced a comprehensive first aid kit from the back of one of the SUVs and was now gently cleaning the scrape on Arthur's temple with an antiseptic wipe. Another aide, a man whose bearing suggested he was a former Army medic, was expertly checking Arthur's vital signs, his touch gentle but firm, his expression professionally concerned. "He's disoriented, General, and his blood pressure is a little erratic, as one might expect, but his pulse is fairly strong. He appears stable for now. However, we should definitely get him properly checked out at a hospital, sir, as a precaution, given his advanced age and the nature of the electrical shock," the medic reported quietly and respectfully to Harmon. General Harmon nodded curtly. "Thank you, Sergeant. Make the arrangements." He looked down at Arthur, whose eyes were now a little clearer, fixed on Harmon's face with a mixture of lingering disbelief, profound gratitude, and a dawning sense of safety. "Arthur," Harmon said softly, his voice losing its hard edge, replaced by a tone of deep, personal concern, "we're going to take excellent care of you now. No more bus stops for a while, my friend. Not like this, anyway. You're coming with us." He gestured discreetly, and two of his strong, capable men moved forward, carefully, respectfully, and with infinite gentleness, helping Arthur to his feet. The old soldier was unsteady, his legs shaky, and he leaned heavily on them for support, but he managed a weak, wan smile for Harmon. "Thank you, David," he whispered, his voice still hoarse. It's truly good to see you, son. Even even like this. It's an honor to see you again, Arthur." "Always was, always will be," Harmon replied, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely allowed to surface. Arthur was then gently guided towards the most comfortable-looking of the black SUVs, its wide rear door held open invitingly. As he was being carefully helped inside, he caught sight of his spilled satchel and its precious contents still lying on the pavement. "My things," he murmured, a flicker of renewed anxiety in his tired eyes. "Martha's picture, my papers. It's all perfectly safe, Arthur," Harmon assured him, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. "We have it all right here. Everything is safe and sound." The aide with the kind face had, in fact, already meticulously and reverently gathered every single item, including the smallest scraps of paper, placing them carefully back into the canvas satchel, which she now held with a respect usually reserved for a diplomatic pouch. Officer Miller stood utterly alone now, a stark, isolated figure stripped of his authority, his power, and his dignity, a pariah on the very street corner he was sworn to protect. Chief Henderson was speaking in low, urgent, and angry tones into his radio, already initiating the formal internal affairs investigation that he knew would be brutal and intensely scrutinized. The remaining uniformed police officers who had arrived on the scene in the interim kept a respectful, almost fearful, distance from General Harmon's team, their expressions a mixture of awe, apprehension, and a dawning understanding of the magnitude of the event they were witnessing. The news of what had transpired at the Elm and Main bus stop would spread through the Elmwood Police Department, and indeed the entire city, like wildfire, a potent and cautionary tale of unchecked arrogance, profound ignorance, and the catastrophic, career-ending consequences of disrespecting the unseen, unsung giants who walk quietly among us. For Officer Miller, the immediate future looked unimaginably bleak, a suspension without pay, an almost certain dismissal from the force, and the very real, looming possibility of criminal charges for assault, battery, and official misconduct, significantly aggravated by the victim's age, his frail condition, and his now revealed heroic status. The viral video, already gaining unstoppable traction across multiple social media platforms, would ensure relentless public scrutiny and condemnation. His career, so recently and arrogantly begun, was, for all intents and purposes, already over. The incident at the Elm and Main bus stop did not simply fade into the next news cycle. The shocking video footage, combined with General Harmon's formidable reputation and Arthur Jenkins' undeniable, profoundly moving story of heroism, created a media firestorm and a wave of public outrage that swept through the city and beyond. The mayor's office, facing a public relations nightmare, issued a profound and unequivocal public apology within hours, promising a full investigation and swift action. Chief Henderson, facing immense pressure from City Hall, veterans groups, and an incensed public, announced a comprehensive, top-to-bottom review of the Elmwood Police Department's use of force policies and, crucially, its entire training curriculum. A new emphasis was mandated on de-escalation techniques, advanced community policing strategies, and specific detailed protocols for interacting with vulnerable populations, including the elderly, those with disabilities, and military veterans. Sensitivity training, once a cursory, checkbox item in the academy syllabus, was slated to become a rigorous, ongoing, and mandatory requirement for every officer on the force. General Harmon, true to his word and his character, ensured that Arthur Jenkins received the best possible medical care and personal attention. A thorough examination at a private hospital revealed no lasting physical damage from the taser, thankfully, but the emotional trauma of the assault and the preceding humiliation was evident. Harmon visited him daily at the comfortable private care facility where Arthur was temporarily recuperating, sharing old stories of his father, Major Sam Harmon, and listening patiently and intently to Arthur's quiet, often fragmented reminiscences of a long life lived with quiet honor despite its many hardships and losses. He learned more about Arthur's unassuming post-war existence, his deep and abiding love for Martha, his small, meticulously tended rose garden, his simple, unchanging routines. The stark, almost unbelievable contrast between the gentle, unassuming old man before him and the lion-hearted young soldier he had once been, the saint of Chosen, was staggering and deeply moving. Local veterans organizations, spurred into action by the public outcry and General Harmon's discreet but powerful influence behind the scenes, rallied around Arthur. A substantial benevolent fund was quickly established in his name, not just to address his own future needs, but also to assist other elderly, infirm, or forgotten veterans within the community who were struggling in silence. Volunteers stepped forward in droves, offering to help with errands, home repairs, transportation, or simply to provide companionship and a listening ear. The bus stop at Elm and Main, the scene of Arthur's degradation, became an impromptu, organic memorial for several days. People from all walks of life left flowers, small American flags, candles, and scores of handwritten notes expressing apology, gratitude, and profound respect. The City Council, in a rare and laudable display of bipartisan unanimity, voted to officially rename the small, somewhat neglected park adjacent to the Veterans Center as Arthur Jenkins Valor Green. Officer Miller was formally arrested and charged with felony assault, aggravated battery on a person over 65, and official misconduct. His subsequent trial became a focal point for broader community discussions about police reform, accountability, and the critical importance of respect in law enforcement. He was found guilty on all counts, his desperate defense of resisting arrest and officer safety concerns crumbling under the weight of incontrovertible eyewitness testimony. The damning viral video evidence, and the sheer, unassailable moral force of Arthur Jenkins' story. He received a significant prison sentence, a stark and unambiguous message sent by the court about the severe consequences of abusing authority and betraying public trust. Arthur, with General Harmon's continued support and guidance, eventually chose to move into a highly regarded assisted living facility that specialized in veteran care. A place where his needs would be met with dignity and understanding, and where his past was not a forgotten footnote but a source of communal pride and respect. He no longer had to rely on the number 12 bus. His days of waiting anxiously at street corners were over. Arthur Jenkins, the 93-year-old decorated war hero, so brutally underestimated, disrespected, and assaulted at a simple city bus stop, found his quiet dignity and his forgotten valor dramatically and publicly restored. The prompt, decisive intervention of General David Harmon, a significant figure emerging from a past Arthur himself thought long buried and irrelevant, not only saved him from further harm and indignity, but also shone a blinding, much-needed light on his incredible, selfless heroism, a heroism that had lain dormant and unrecognized for decades. Officer Miller, the young, arrogant aggressor whose actions had precipitated this crisis, faced the full and severe consequences of his deplorable conduct: immediate suspension, swift dismissal from the police force, and ultimately, a criminal conviction and incarceration, serving as a stark and sobering warning against prejudice, ignorance, and the catastrophic abuse of power. The Elmwood Police Department, humbled, shamed, and forced into a period of profound introspection, initiated sweeping, systemic reforms in its recruitment, training, and community engagement protocols, with the stated aim of ensuring that such a travesty of justice would be far less likely to ever happen again. The wider community, awakened from its collective indifference by the shocking injustice done to one of its own, rallied to support not just Arthur Jenkins, but all its elderly veterans, reminded in the most poignant way possible of the silent sacrifices that underpin their everyday freedoms and security. This story, in its pain and its ultimate vindication, cuts to the very heart of a timeless and vital truth. We must never, ever judge individuals by their outward appearance, by the perceived frailty of age, by the simplicity of their attire, or by the humility of their current circumstances. The most unassuming souls, those who move quietly through the world without fanfare or demand, often carry the grandest histories, the deepest scars of sacrifice, and the most profound, tested courage. Respect is not a gift to be selectively bestowed upon those who fit our narrow preconceptions. It is a fundamental human right, earned through the crucible of a lifetime of experience. And for those who have served their nation in uniform, it is a sacred debt of honor owed by society, a debt that must be paid with gratitude and recognition. The quiet heroes walk among us every single day, their extraordinary stories etched not in bold headlines or marble monuments, but in the intricate lines on their faces, the characteristic stoop of their shoulders from burdens long carried, and the faraway, reflective look in their eyes. We, as a society, must learn to truly see them, to actively listen to their often unspoken stories, to honor their contributions before their voices fall silent forever. Imagine for a final, lingering moment, Arthur Jenkins, some months later. He is seated comfortably in a sun-drenched courtyard at his new residence, a soft woolen blanket draped over his knees despite the gentle warmth of the afternoon. General David Harmon sits beside him, not in his capacity as a decorated four-star general, but simply as a friend, a grateful son of a fallen comrade, sharing a quiet laugh over a shared memory. A small group of schoolchildren, on a field trip from a local elementary school, approach them tentatively, their faces alight with curiosity and a touch of awe. Their teacher, having shared a simplified but heartfelt version of Arthur's remarkable story with them, gently encourages them forward. One small girl, no more than 7 years old, clutching a brightly colored, hand-drawn picture of a smiling soldier with a large, vibrant red heart emblazoned on his chest, steps forward shyly and offers her creation to Arthur. "Thank you for being so brave, Mr. Jenkins," she says, her voice small but clear as a bell. Arthur's eyes, rheumy with age but now bright and clear, fill with gentle tears as he accepts the precious drawing with a slightly trembling hand. A genuine, peaceful smile graces his lips, a smile of profound contentment, of belated but deeply felt recognition, of finally, truly, belonging. The fight for respect for our elders, our veterans, our unseen and unsung heroes, is a daily, ongoing battle that requires our constant vigilance and commitment. Their stories must be told, their sacrifices remembered and cherished, their dignity fiercely protected. Subscribe to this channel for more narratives that give voice to the voiceless and honor the enduring legacy of those who have given so much of themselves for others. Type honor in the comments section below if you firmly believe that every hero, no matter how humble their current station or how faded their past glories, deserves our deepest respect, our unwavering gratitude, and our unending remembrance.